A parking space, parking place, or parking spot is a location that is designated for parking, either paved or unpaved. It can be in a parking garage, in a parking lot, or on a city street. The space may be delineated by road surface markings. The automobile fits inside the space, either by parallel parking, perpendicular parking, or angled parking. If in tandem parking, whoever pulled in the tandem parking stall first is now technically in the back. The second car is now in the front since they have to leave first. Depending on the location of the parking space, the time allowed to park may be fixed by regulation, and a fee may be required to use the parking space. It may be designated for free parking. When the demand for spaces outstrips supply, vehicles may overspill park onto the sidewalk, grass verges, and other places which were not designed for the purpose. For most motorized vehicles, there are three commonly used arrangements of parking spaces: parallel parking, perpendicular parking, and angle parking. These are self-park configurations where the vehicle driver is able to access the parking independently. With parallel parking of cars, these are arranged in a line, with the front bumper of one car facing the back bumper of an adjacent one. This is done parallel to a curb, when one is provided. Parallel parking is the most common mode of street-side parking for cars. It may also be used in parking lots and parking structures, but usually only to supplement parking spaces that use the other modes. Perpendicular parking. With perpendicular parking, also known as bay parking, cars are parked side to side, perpendicular to an aisle, curb, or wall. This type of car parking fits more cars per length of road, or curb, than parallel parking when a wider space is available, and is therefore commonly used in car parking lots and car parking structures. Often, in car parking lots using perpendicular parking, two rows of parking spaces may be arranged front to front, with aisles in between. If no other cars are blocking, a driver may perform a pull-through by driving through one parking space into the connecting space to avoid having to reverse out of a parking space upon their return. Sometimes, a single row of perpendicular car parking spaces is marked in the center of a street. This arrangement eliminates reversing from the maneuver. Cars are required to drive in forwards and drive out forwards. Angle parking, known as echelon parking in Britain, is similar to perpendicular parking for these vehicles, except that cars are arranged at an angle to the aisle, an acute angle with the direction of approach. The gentler turn allows easier and quicker parking, narrower aisles, and thus higher density than perpendicular parking. While in theory the aisles are one way, in practice they are typically wide enough to allow two cars to pass slowly when drivers go down the aisles the wrong way. Angle parking is very common in car parking lots. It may also be used in street-side car parking in the US when there is more width available for car parking than would be needed for parallel parking of cars, as it creates a larger number of parking spaces. Some cities have utilized angled parking on street, as compared to off-street parking facilities. This has been done mostly in residential, retail, and mixed-use areas where additional parking compared to parallel parking is desired and traffic volumes are lower. Most angled parking is designed in a head-in configuration, while a few cities, Seattle, Portland, Baltimore, and Indianapolis are examples, have some back-in angled parking, typically on hills or low traffic volume streets. Angle parking is considered dangerous by cycling organizations, especially in the head-in configuration, despite the increased visibility when reversing out of the space compared with reversing out of a perpendicular parking space. When comparing to parallel parking, 1. There is a significant risk to cyclists from vehicles reversing out, as approaching bicycles are in the blind spot of the reversing and turning vehicles. 2. Longer vehicles project further into the road, this can inconvenience/endanger other road users. 3. The surplus road space which enables angle parking could also be used for bicycle lanes. Hence organizations such as the Cyclists Touring Club are usually opposed to all proposed echelon parking schemes, though there are some alternatives, such as back-in angle parking, slanted the wrong way, with the driver reversing into the space, rather than reversing out, which can overcome many of the issues of safety. Besides these basic modes of motor vehicle parking, there are instances where a more ad hoc approach to arranging motor vehicles is appropriate. For example, in parts of some large cities, such as Chicago and Bangalore, where land is expensive and therefore parking space is at a premium, there are formal and informal parking lots for motor vehicles where the driver leaves the keys to the vehicle with an attendant who arranges vehicles so as to maximize the number of vehicles that can be parked in the lot. Vehicles may be packed up to 5 vehicles deep in combinations of perpendicular and slash or parallel parking with limited circulation aisles for the parking attendant. Such arrangements are known as attendant parking. When the lot or facility is provided to serve the customers of a business, it is considered valet parking. Inner-city parking lots are often temporary, the operators renting land which is vacant pending the construction of a new office building. Some inner-city lots are equipped with individual lifts, allowing cars to be stored above each other. Another ad hoc arrangement is tandem parking. This is sometimes done with residential motor vehicle parking where 2 motor vehicles park nose to end in tandem. The first motor vehicle does not have independent access, and the second motor vehicle must move to provide access. As with attendant parking, the purpose is to maximize the number of motor vehicles that can park in a limited space. Formalized tandem parking will sometimes be sanctioned by local planning authorities for staff parking arrangements require additional parking in limited spaces. Marks and space size. In parking lots, car parks in British English, parking is allowed only where marked. In the US, minimum width standards of parking spaces usually range from 8.5 to 9.0 feet, 2.6 to 2.7 m. Angled and perpendicular spaces may need to be wide to allow doors to open, while parallel parking spots may be narrower on low-traffic neighborhood streets. Because the boundary between the parking space and the driving area is not always well defined, the length of a parking space is more difficult to establish. However, most angled and perpendicular spaces are considered to be between 10 and 18 feet, 3.0 to 5.5 m, in length. In the United States, due to vehicles being larger on average than some other countries for a parking space 10 feet, 3.0 m, deep is uncommon and most parking spaces will be within 16 to 20 feet, 4.9 to 6.1 m, with 19 feet, 5.8 m, feet deep being the standard. Recommended depth for standard perpendicular parking. Parallel parking spaces typically range from 20 to 24 feet, 6.1 to 7.3 m, long. During construction, the specific dimensions of a parking space are decided by a variety of factors. A high cost of land will encourage smaller dimensions and the introduction of compact spaces. Many garages and parking lots have spaces designated for a compact car only. These spaces are narrower than traditional spaces, thus allowing more cars to park. According to French standard Norme NFP 91-100, minimum width of parking spaces range from 2.20 to 2.30 meters, 7.2 to 7.5 feet, CFR Marquage du Stationnement en France. Narrow parking spaces such as in Vevey, Switzerland, might make opening the door difficult in a larger vehicle. Larger cars are an issue when the size of the bay is fixed. Automobile associations warn of this issue. A Swiss association regulating parking space wants to consider this issue for 2016. In the United Kingdom, the recommended standard parallel bay size is 2.4 meters, 7.9 feet, wide by 4.8 meters, 16 feet, long. Recently there has been some controversy about most UK parking spaces being too small to fit modern cars, which have grown significantly since standards were set decades ago. A new standard size of 2.6 meters wide, 8.5 feet, and 5 meters long, 16.4 feet, has been proposed. In Australia, the dimensions are defined in as 2890 and are 2.4 m wide by 5.4 m long. Barriers. Parking spaces commonly contain a parking chock, wheel stop, which is used to prevent cars from pulling too far into the space and obstructing a neighboring parking space, curb, or sidewalk. contacting with and then damaging a building wall. This barrier is usually made of concrete and will normally be a horizontal bar to stop the tires from moving forward or a vertical bar that may cause damage to the vehicle if contact is made. In a parking garage, the barrier will often be a concrete wall. Parking spaces for the disabled. Some parking spaces are reserved as disabled accessible parking, for individuals with disabilities. Disabled parking spaces are typically marked with the international symbol of access, though in practice, the design of the symbol varies widely. In the United States, the Access Board provides guidelines on parking spaces. Women's parking spaces. In some countries, women's parking spaces have been established in more visible spots to reduce the chance of sexual attacks, facilitate parking for women, or to provide spaces that are closer to shopping centers or employment. Curb markings in the United States are prescribed by the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUCD. Local highway agencies may prescribe special colors for curb markings to supplement standard signs for parking regulation. California has designated an array of colors for curb regulations. A white curb designates passenger pickup or drop-off. The green curb is for time-limited parking. The yellow curb is for loading, and the blue curb is for disabled persons with proper vehicle identification. The red curb is for emergency vehicles only, fire lanes, no stopping, standing, or parking. In Oregon and Florida, the yellow curb is utilized to indicate no parking. In Georgia, either red or yellow can be used to indicate no parking. In Seattle, Washington, alternating red and yellow curb markings indicate a bus stop. Back-in angle parking, also called back-in diagonal parking, reverse angle parking, reverse diagonal parking, or, in the United Kingdom, reverse echelon parking, is a traffic engineering technique intended to improve the safety of on-street parking. For back-in parking, vehicles preparing to enter a parking space drive slightly past the space, signal, and then back into the space. When leaving the space, drivers have an unobstructed view of traffic and can enter the traffic stream directly. In comparison, drivers using traditional pull-in angle parking, entering the parking space with the front first, often have difficulty seeing other traffic as they back out of the space when leaving again, resulting in traffic delays and considerable risk of collisions with pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicles. Existing pull-in angle parking spaces can be converted to back-in angle parking by restriping to flip the angle of the stall markings. Streets with parallel parking have also been converted to back-in angle parking. In either case, the pavement markings are often augmented with signage indicating that vehicles must be backed in. Advantages. According to the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center, back-in angle parking provides motorists with better vision of pedestrians, bicyclists, motor vehicles, and other road users as they exit a parking space and enter moving traffic. Back-in angle parking also eliminates much of the difficulty that drivers, especially older drivers, have when backing into moving traffic. In Tucson, back-in angle parking greatly reduced the number of cyclist motor vehicle collisions. The vehicle positioning associated with back-in angle parking allows eye contact and verbal or nonverbal communication between exiting drivers and other road users. Back-in angle parking positions the back of the vehicle next to the sidewalk/footway, enabling easier loading and unloading of the trunk/boot. It also positions the driver and passengers, including children, to enter and exit the vehicle towards the sidewalk instead of stepping toward traffic. In some cities, parallel parking adjacent to bicycle lanes is permitted. This puts the bike lane in the dangerous door zone, but angle parking eliminates this hazard. Compared to parallel parking, reverse angle parking often provides more parking spaces in a given length of street, though this will vary depending on site conditions such as street width and the locations of driveways and fire hydrants. Disadvantages. The primary disadvantage of back-in angle parking is that some drivers find the backing maneuver awkward, particularly if they have limited backing experience or the vehicle has poor rearward visibility. This can be overcome by intelligent use of side mirrors and reversing cameras, though blind spots can remain. Another criticism is that exhaust emissions may annoy pedestrians and residents nearby. Inexperienced drivers may take a wider clearance from an adjacent vehicle, resulting in less efficient use of available space. Also, when backing into a relatively enclosed area, example a solid wall or stall, unseen pedestrians may more easily be injured, since visibility behind the vehicle is more limited. In standard angle parking, the driver takes very little time to park, and waits for a gap in the traffic before backing out, whereas back-in angle parking forces traffic to wait until the maneuver is completed, compounding gridlock and congestion problems. In 2015, the city of Fremont, California reverted its experiment with back-in angle parking. Parallel parking is a method of parking a vehicle parallel to the road, in line with other parked vehicles. Parallel parking usually requires initially driving slightly past the parking space, parallel to the parked vehicle in front of that space, keeping a safe distance, then followed by reversing into that space. Subsequent position adjustment may require the use of forward and reverse gears. Techniques. Parallel parking is considered to be one of the most stressful and difficult skills for new drivers to learn. While parallel parking is a required part of most driving tests, several states in the U.S. have dropped it as a requirement. Parallel parking enables the driver to park a vehicle in a smaller space than would be true of forward parking. Driving forward into a parking space on the side of a road is typically not possible unless two or more successive parking spaces are empty. Reversing into the spot via the parallel parking technique allows one to take advantage of a single empty space not much longer than the car. In order to complete the parking within 3 wheel turns, the parking space would generally need to be about 1.5 car length long. New drivers learn to use reference points to align themselves in relation to the car in front of the space, to determine the proper angle for backing, and to determine when to turn the steering wheel while backing. They may find it easier to briefly stop at each reference point and turn for the next step. Steps. 2 major types of parallel parking technique differ in whether they will use 2 or 3 positions of the steering wheel while backing. A skilled driver is theoretically able to parallel park by having their car move along 2 arcs, the first having its center on the parking side of the car and the second having its center on the other side. There will be a point in the transition between these curves where all the car's wheels will be parallel with each other. Less confident drivers may choose to drive further while transitioning, making it a pronounced middle step of 3. Such a step allows greater tolerances to avoid hitting anything, but forces the car to start further from the road's edge and requires more space to the rear. Beginning in the early 2000s, automobile manufacturers began providing computer-assisted automatic parking software on some models that allowed drivers to engage the software to complete the parallel parking maneuver hands-free. Depending on the system, the automatic parking feature controls the steering while the driver operates the accelerator and brakes, or the software handles both steering and accelerator. In Japan, there is a ban on on-street parking, with a few exceptions, such as daytime and evening parking. In addition to this, there is a proof of parking rule and motorists are required to present a garage certificate, shakoso meisho, to prove that they have a garage before being allowed to register a car. In the 1930s, cars were developed with a 5th wheel, in between the 2 rear wheels and perpendicular to them, which could be lowered to the ground and used to drive sideways into a parallel parking spot. This innovation was intended to make parallel parking much easier, but it never became popular. Thank you for watching this video.